Hi and hello. Welcome to physiology. We're just going to start today with a little 10-second chill out, maybe. Take this 10 seconds to sink in. Let yourself forget about other stuff and be present for class. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the history of physiology. We've talked about what science is. Now we're going to talk about how physiology got to be the science that it is now. We often take this for granted. We take this process for granted. And so, our first thing to consider is what actually is physiology. I'm sure that you have a general idea, and you may even have a literal definition that you're fully aware of, but that's kind of where we need to start, right? Is like, we're in this class to learn physiology. What actually is physiology? And so physiology is the study of the function of living things. And kind of the key in this definition is this word right here. When we're talking about physiology, we're talking about function. Whereas when we're talking about anatomy, the sort of companion course to physiology, we're talking about form. And of course, when we're in a class where it's just physiology, we'll have to discuss some anatomy in order to understand the physiology, but our focus is on the actual function. And as you know, the living things that we're going to be studying in this course are humans, like you. All right, so something that helps me a lot when I'm learning new terminology, and something that I'll give you a lot, is sort of the root words and the root terms, and a lot of this comes from Greek. So if we're going to do that with physiology, physio actually means nature. And as you guys know, logi is the study of. Okay, so the study of the function of living things, nature, the study of nature. Well, study of nature, that seems kind of a lot more broad than the function of living things. And that's because where physiology got its name, why it's called physiology, started way back in the 5th and 6th centuries BC. With this group of Greek philosophers. This group of Greek philosophers are called the physiologi. And to me it kind of sounds like maybe they should have some sort of like cool symbol and meet in secret or something. I don't know, maybe they did. So the physiologi were Greek philosophers. A lot of the early physiologists were Greeks. A lot of the early thinkers were Greeks. That we know about. I think that there were probably a lot of other cultures that were discovering these things, but we don't have records of that. So keep that in mind too. All right, so their sort of question of nature was, or questions I should say, what does it do? And why does it exist? So these were the physiology's two major questions. And you can see how that fits a little bit more with a broad study of nature. What does it do? Why does it exist? And they ask these questions of nature. And so the origins of physiology were with this group of Greek philosophers, and it was really quite broad. And you may recognize some of the names of these Greek philosophers. They're quite famous. The name that I very quickly recognized was Pythagoras. Pythagoras was among the physiology. And the other names are in your book. If you're interested, you're absolutely welcome to go explore that. All right, so, excuse me, we started with this very broad study of nature. What does it do? Why does it exist? And then we get into the 4th and 3rd centuries BC. So we're moving forward in time. Remember that when we're talking about time long ago, we go from bigger numbers to smaller numbers, and then we go from smaller numbers to bigger numbers. So we're back in BC, before the Common Era. So we're moving forward in time. In the 4th century and the 3rd century, a name enters the picture that you might find very familiar, particularly if you want to be a physician or work in the medical field, or, if you've ever watched a medical drama. Hippocrates. So Hippocrates is considered the father of medicine, and this is where the Hippocratic Oath comes from. And Hippocrates came up with a lot of really cool stuff, but a lot of not so awesome stuff also. So Hippocrates' major contribution to physiology is not a great one. So he believed that there were 4 humors. No, that color does not work. You cannot see that, can you? Let's see. Let's try this one. He believed that there were 4 humors in the body. These humors were blood, black bile, yellow bile. Does anybody know the last one? It's like what your granddad coughs up. Phlegm. So, he believed that the body was essentially composed of these 4 major humors, and that the balance of these humors, indicated here by this scale, was what determined how healthy the body was. And so Hippocrates believed that if you get these 4 humors out of balance, that leads to illness. So the imbalance of the 4 humors of the body, Hippocrates proposed, believed, thought, is what led to illness. And interestingly, this proposition of Hippocrates persisted for a really, really, really long time. So this little green arrow here is to indicate that belief of Hippocrates that he proposed, and how long that persisted in sort of the center of belief or of thought in the science of physiology, or the developing science of physiology. Physiology wasn't a science yet. Science as we think of it didn't even exist yet. And in just a moment, we're going to talk about how that happened. But this little arrow, I think you'll be surprised how long this idea of an imbalance of these 4 humors persisted in sort of the thought process about the human body and how the human body functions. Also here in the 3rd and 4th century BC is where Aristotle enters the picture. Aristotle had, I think, a really good idea that, of course, in the 3rd and 4th century BC was underdeveloped. But his idea was that every body part was formed for a specific purpose. And that by looking at the form of that body part, you could deduce its function. And this is pretty close to things that we know today, where form and function are very closely interlinked and very closely intertwined. And one of the things that's often taught in anatomy is that we look at the form of something, and that tells you a great deal about the function. So he was pretty right on in his ideas about form and function. So form and function. Okay. So then we get into the 2nd century BC, and here we meet, I don't know how to pronounce his name, so I'll just write it up there for you. Erasistratus? Sounds good to me. And so he did some really cool stuff. So he accurately described the valves of the heart. That's not a particularly easy thing to do. The heart is pretty stinking complex. He did that. And in addition to accurately describing the valves of the heart, maybe, come on, cooperate. Don't know what I did, guys. I thought I was so smart. There we go. In addition to accurately describing the valves of the heart, he also distinguished between motor neurons and sensory neurons. And when we get into the nervous system, I think you guys this is gonna blow your mind a little bit. That he figured out that there was a difference between motor and sensory neurons, and accurately described them in the 1st and 2nd century BC. So this should say 1st century BC. Okay. All right. So 2nd and 1st century, we have people describing the valves of the heart. We have the differentiation between the motor and sensory neurons, and this is some pretty cool, intricate, detailed stuff. And while we have ideas developing, we still, you'll notice, continue to have the persistence of this idea of the 4 humors, and that the 4 humors are what balance our health. Oh, look, there it is, 1st century BC. All right. Oh, and now we're going to make our motor and sensory neurons a little bit bigger. My animations are a little bit off. Don't worry, I'll get better about it. All right. In the 1st and 2nd century AD, we have a pretty major player enter the scene here, guys. Galen. Galen did some really, really cool stuff. Figured out some really, really cool stuff, but also had some not so good ideas. The stuff that he did we're gonna spend a couple slides on it. So we're gonna zoom in a little bit on Galen. All right. So 1st and 2nd century AD. Again, we're talking about Galen. And so what did Galen do? Galen accurately described the function of the kidneys in the 1st and 2nd century, which, wow. When we talk about the kidneys, I think this will blow your mind. All right. Another thing that he did was he described spinal nerves. And then he also figured out that arteries carry blood. And so you might be thinking, well, yeah, duh. But think about in the 1st and 2nd century AD, there was so much we did not understand about the human body. Consider the fact that we still have over here on the right side of our screen, what's over there? This idea of the 4 humors still dominated thought about the well-being of the human body. All right, so Galen did some really cool stuff, contributed some incredible things to our understanding of physiology. There were some things that maybe not so much. All right, so he also believed that the human body took in air. So air came in to the body. Oh, you can't really see my arrow there. Let's see, maybe this color will show up. Air came in to the human body and then was filtered by the brain, the liver, and the heart. Okay, air does come into the body, it is filtered. Not the brain, the liver, and the heart, but still, like, okay, you can get behind that, right? Air comes into the body, it's filtered, and then it turns into spirits, or souls. And he believed that those spirits or those souls were what governed the body's function. And so you may remember from the video that we watched about hand washing that a major idea was that illnesses were carried on the air. So you can see this idea kind of back here in the 1st and 2nd century as well. That's sort of same general thought process. And so while he contributed some really extraordinary discoveries, back here we weren't scientific yet. This was all just sort of ideas and thoughts and beliefs. And so this is something that he believed. And because he contributed so much that was really positive, this idea that he had about air being converted to spirits or souls, and those spirits or souls governing the body function, persisted for a very, very long time. And so now we're going to add another arrow. Oh, I just realized you guys can't see the green arrow, can you? Hang on. There we go. Oh, crap. That's not good. Y'all haven't been able to see that the whole time. So, yeah, just learning the technology. There you go. There's that green arrow if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. There's the green arrow. Okay, so now we have our green arrow representing the idea of the four humors and the balance of the four humors, determining health. And now we've added this idea from Galen about air being filtered into spirits or souls, and the spirits of souls or souls being what governs the health or body function. Okay, now we're gonna like fast forward through a little more than 10 centuries. It's a lot of time. While the ideas of Hippocrates and Galen just dominated thought about the human body. And we're going to skip forward to this period of time, the 14th century through the 17th century. And this whole section of the 14th century through the 17th century, let's see here, is the Renaissance. This all of it. I'm looking at my notes because I can't spell. This is the Renaissance, and I'm sure you've heard of the Renaissance. So much happened during the Renaissance with art and culture and inventions. This was a time of extraordinary growth for our species. Embedded within the Renaissance, right here, this part within the Renaissance was the scientific revolution. The scientific revolution is when science started to become what we know as science during the 16th and 17th centuries. So the scientific revolution is when, make this a little smaller, is when those concepts that we talked about in our previous lectures of reproducibility, so the reproducibility of science, if you publish something, like I said, and you say this causes this, or I gave animals this and it caused this this illness, or I tested this vaccine and it produced this response. Now we know from what we talked about at the beginning, or you may have already known this, that has to be reproducible for it to be viable. Before the scientific revolution, that wasn't a part of early scientific thought, what was going to become science as we know it. So during the scientific revolution, this idea of reproducibility started to take center stage. In addition to reproducibility, the process of science started to take shape. So that whole sequence, so much of it that you're already familiar with from junior high, high school, and earlier science classes started to take shape. And then the idea that those things needed to be put out to the public and then checked, right? And that's the reproducibility. So that whole process, science as a process, started to become a thing during the scientific revolution. And so what's really cool, I think, about this is that this was only about 400 years ago. Only about 400 years ago did science as we know it start to take shape. And we've made such unbelievable strides in that 400 years. Also during the scientific revolution is when these ideas of the four humors and their balance and air being taken into the body and filtered into spirits or souls, these ideas were actually tested and they were disproven. And so that's when these very long-standing ideas in science were rejected by what was becoming the scientific community. So then we move forward to really what I would call the modern scientific era. So 1750-ish to 2020, which is now. The reason I put 1750 there is there were some really important discoveries that occurred around 1750. And we're going to talk about these as we move through. So the things that we are studying this whole semester, taking this whole semester, and just being able to scratch the surface of, all of that happened within this very short time period. So this is only 270 years. So science, as we know it, has developed only in the last 270 years, and I don't think that that's something that we realize very often. So particularly physiology. So there are many areas of science that are much, much younger than that, like genetics. Genetics is a baby. Physiology is considered a modern discipline, or a mature scientific discipline. So physiology is mature. Whereas other areas like genomics, genetics are babies. So my sort of area of expertise is just the baby science. All right, so that's where we're going to leave off, talking about the history of science, and I'll see you back here. Go grab a drink, grab a snack, take a break, go for a run, whatever it is you do to give your brain a break, and I'll see you back here shortly.